Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
And I'm Sonia Strimban.
And we are looking at In the Presence of a Clown.
Jag just läser bladet att filmindustrin befinner sig i svårigheter. Problemet i första hand är konstnärligt, inte finansiellt. Nya idéer ger nya pengar. Jag ser framför mig sköna, färgrika, lysande bilder. Ansikten, lemmar, rörelser. Och så musik.
Och ibland undrar jag varför jag älskar dig som jag älskar dig, Karl-Åke. Du är tjock och du är plufsig och ditt skägg börjar gråna något alldeles hemskt. Du är inte snäll. Jag har till och med försökt ta ihjäl mig. Du har bedragit mig 2 gånger under vår förlovningstid. Jag förstår inte om du ska ha med andra damer. Jag förstår inte vad andra damer ser i dig som är så lockande. Nej, som sagt, och klarsynen drabbar mig. Det händer ganska ofta nu för tiden. Och fattar inte varför jag faktiskt älskar dig. Och nu när du sitter där i din orerar om den levande talfilmen. Nej, säg ingenting och allt som vi ska göra tillsammans. Ja, då vill jag bara gråta och falla på knä och kanske till och med kyssa dina händer.
After several years away from the camera, Ingmar Bergman returns with this film, which is very challenging, but it's also one that harkens back to a lot of the themes that we become familiar with.
Challenging, but not necessarily from the perspective of complexity. I think some of the elements of this film may have gotten away from him, and it was rather difficult to watch. It was very lengthy, and he tried to play with certain structures or tropes or even themes that, as you mentioned, we've seen recently, but they've somehow gotten away from him. So the dialogues were too wordy, too long. The symbolism, again, almost took me back to some of his earlier films, his earliest, where it was rather heavy-handed and placed awkwardly, almost shoehorned into the set or into the scene or the plot in order to try to make some kind of complexity or metaphor.
For example, the mysterious female clown who comes out of nowhere without much explanation. So that's not the only thing. Bergman spends a lot of this film looking at the relationship between the artist, his sanity, and his relationship with the audience. In fact, that is the largest chunk, I think, of In the Presence of a Clown.
One of the things we're seeing in this film, again, is this kind of overlaying of multiple genres of art or creation of art. So we're obviously watching a film, and within the film we have a film, and within that film we have the merging of film and theater together on stage, which becomes really interesting. But I think what's different, and one of the redeeming factors of In the Presence of a Clown for me, is how Bergman tries to put that on its head. So part of the new production that Carl is trying to bring to the world, so he's literally projecting a film onto a stage and performers that are performing a live play. So it's kind of like a film on top of the theater. But in the middle of the performance, there's a fire in the theater, an electrical fire, and so they have to abruptly end the performance and actually escape where their lives are in danger. And that's where I think a lot of the exploration in the film begins, because you have this experiment of merging 2 art forms together that cannot go together, and I think that's what Bergman is trying to show us. By having the fire, it's kind of like a traumatic event that rips them asunder, and then they have to figure out whether the 2 can coexist or have to forever be separate, or whether one is better than the other.
I think that this film is perhaps the most intense exploration that Bergman has taken on his relationship with the cinema and his separate relationship with the stage. They've always been something that he has balanced in his professional life, and I think searched for a way to merge them. Maybe not literally, but find meaning in his own existence where both film and stage could exist. I've never seen it play out quite as it does here.
I think the intensity you're referencing is definitely a struggle of the artist. And in this film, quite literally, it almost drives him to insanity. The scene that I really enjoy is after the fire at the theater, the meager audience that they've managed to accumulate for this performance actually goes to the director's home, and they decide to continue with just the stage production of it in their kind of living room. So they reset the stage in the house, but there's obviously not that partition of, you know, the fourth wall, of this is the stage and where the actors perform, and this is the seating where the audience observes from.
In fact, Bergman
So-
takes the literal moment where he switches the audience and the stage.
Exactly. Well, it's not even switching. It's more like they're all one together. And in order to make the scenes work, they have to constantly rotate in order to create the kind of angles or settings that the actors need in order to play out their scenes. So it becomes this kind of amalgamated performance where the audience is literally integrated into the production itself, and I think it makes the whole experience rather rich. In fact, it creates an experience, whereas before it wasn't necessarily one.
It was the first time that I've seen Bergman actually ask the question of what role does the audience play in the creation of my art? You know, in cinema, you don't actually, as a filmmaker, get to hear the voice of your audience until, for example, your movie screens at Cannes or at the local theater. With stage productions, you're automatically getting that sort of interaction, whether it's coughing or crying or laughing from your audience. And I think Bergman here has really focused on how those relate, and even maybe if he didn't intend to, he sort of questions the value of cinema compared to stage, the stage more impactful. And he raises one question, which I found particularly impactful. What is the meaning of community when it comes to art?
I think this is a film that Bergman could have only made at this stage in his career. It's taken him a significant amount of time to realize that expression, even self-expression, in the creation of art is a communal event. It's a communal experience. You can't create something in a vacuum. You need feedback. You need people to act as witnesses. And even constructive criticism is healthy for a project. And he's always created films, like we've said before, for himself, about himself, that are highly autobiographical and can only really be appreciated by his own intellect. He's always sneered at critics of any kind, and if the film didn't do well, he's been very critical of audiences. So
I kind of disagree with you there, though. He might have made these films for himself, but the success of Ingmar Bergman is at least partly due to the fact that his story resonates with mankind, or at least a lot of people, the inner struggle.
I'm not saying that they're not intelligent enough to pick up on common threads of humanity.
Okay.
They are, but as a director, he's always, put himself on a pedestal, if you will, to say, this is my film. I made it how I wanted. I made it according to my vision, and everything that the rest of you think, if it doesn't agree with what I think, is irrelevant.
I think that's just an artist by definition, isn't it?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps. But I think what I'm trying to get to is that, he's reached a level of maturity as an artist, as a creator, to recognize that the audience is intimately involved with the creation of whatever it is that he's producing.
Yeah.
And so what he's giving us here is an exploration of more of a dialogue. Being engaged with the audience in a more integrated way allows the work to live longer and in a more robust fashion, right? Because the preservation of art, as you referenced before, is by people bearing witness to it, by people interpreting it, and creating value. And when they create value, they want to preserve it. That's why oral traditions are so powerful. And for generations, people can pass down a story without even writing it down.
But I think that's one of the particularly impactful questions that he raises with this film, especially when it comes to what does the meaning of cinema have to do with society and how does it relate to Ingmar Bergman. There's a moment in this film where they specifically point out that the materials that make up a film reel, make up the film, are combustible and they can catch fire at any moment. I mean, it doesn't actually relate to the storyline, but these characters specifically point out that film is temporary and at any moment we could lose it. That was a particularly important moment for me in Bergman's sort of questioning of what his role is in the broader perspective of cinema.
And yet he still delivers this to us in the manner of a film, ultimately.
That's true. We didn't sit through a stage performance. Obviously, cinema gave him a much further reach, and one that wasn't temporary in 1997 when this was produced, but in fact we're watching today, and theoretically generations after us will also see. But I also think there's something to say about technology and how Bergman relates to it in this film. He's always had a childhood fascination with the film projector and cinema as a whole. And I mean, we've seen it play out many times. We see that in this film as well. But it's also hard to ignore what Bergman is saying in this film about theater. There's a character that points out at one moment that the play was better than the film, which we can reach to comments like maybe the book was better than the film. But Bergman definitely finds a level of respect for stage productions that he doesn't have for cinema. And I think with my experience speaking to Liv Ullmann, she pointed out that Bergman was not a man of technology. She doesn't see how he would operate in this modern world of gadgets and social media. She doesn't think he would fit in. She thinks he would feel lost. And I think you sort of see early evidence of that in this film, where he's really struggling with the future.
That being said, overall, this movie was still quite a slog to get through.
That's true.
I mean, that was definitely one of the finer elements of the film in terms of theme and like a portion of the plot that he gave us. The rest of it was so random and arbitrary and abrupt. Like, I found the characters very unappealing. You could not relate to them. Even their insanity was kind of banal at best. I've seen him portray that so much better in other movies. The symbolism, as I mentioned before, very heavy-handed and awkward in many places. And what was with the scatological references? I just did not get what that came from.
Yeah, Bergman seems to have taken a real love for that type of humor ever since Fanny and Alexander, I think. But it just keeps showing up time and time again. There's a particularly poignant moment in the film where one of the audience members says, "Please respect my humiliating condition by getting to the point." And I think that sort of represents the entire film here. There's a lot of dragging on, a lot of rambling, and I think several moments where it almost lost us. And I think we're relatively dedicated Bergman viewers. I remember a scene very early on in the film where the two old men were speaking to each other, and literally I think we said, doesn't this just feel like you're speaking to two old men? And I think that is not how a writer should be constructing his scripts. You shouldn't be losing us, especially early on.
Agreed.
Do you think this one is essential Bergman?
Not in the format that it's in. I think at its core, there are some really interesting explorations and ideas that he's presenting to us, but it's encased in so much that I just wouldn't ever want to watch it again.
Yeah, I feel like a sound effect is appropriate for the way that we felt about this film. And I think that is very frustrating, at least it was for me. There's a lot of ideas from this film in particular, but they never really come to fruition. They had to be literally yanked out of the film by us to discuss them. So I'm going to have to agree with you, not essential Bergman.
Så blir det mörkt i bilden och så slutar musiken. Ja, så är det slut på vår biograffilm.
That brings us to the end of this discussion on Breaking Down Bergman. Join us next time when we'll be looking at the film Saraband.
And in the meantime, you can head on over to our Facebook page and click like.
Or subscribe to our channel on YouTube.
And be sure to join in on the discussion. We will see you next time on Breaking Down Bergman.